Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the third of our Daemon webinars. We're particularly excited to have a representative from AWS on our panel today. And our theme is turning cloud optimization into innovation funding. So we're going to look at how the potentially conflicting challenges of cost optimization and releasing funding for innovation are going to be, well, we're going to give you some insights on how we might address those problems. So for those who aren't already familiar with Daemon, we're a medium-sized technology and AI consultancy based in the UK, but with a growing South African division. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we recently won the AWS Innovation Partner Award of the Year award. So we're going to be splitting our agenda into three main themes. We'll be looking at how we're going to move beyond simple historical cost-cutting strategies to something that is going to be much more proactive, looking at how we can avoid the technology waste we've seen in the past. We'll be going to the panel for some anecdotes and some useful tips on the hidden drains, where your real costs may actually be, and it may not be in the most obvious places that you've looked in the past. And then we're going to look at how we can free up that funding and use it for innovation within the business, rather than just seeing it disappear into a general bucket. So we're going to have a wide panel. We'll look at each of those themes. We will be taking questions. If you're on the webinar at the moment and you'd like to ask a question, you can do that through the software. So we'll be coming to that at the end of the presentation. Okay. So just to introduce the panel, myself, I'm Martin Rogers. I've been with Daemon for about 8 years. I've been in the industry for over 30 now. I primarily come from a software engineering background, but I've also done quite a lot of work in cost optimization, performance optimization, and so on. If I can move on to Paul.
Brilliant, thanks Martin. So hi there, yeah, so my name's Paul Campbell. Thank you everyone for joining today. Really looking forward to getting to the meat of this webinar and getting into some good conversation. But a bit of background around me. So I've worked in technology for the last 25 years. I've been working with Daemon for around 14 to 15 of those years. So I've been around a while and I've definitely seen some things in my time. But since joining Daemon, I've carried out a number of different roles. So I started as a consultant back in 2011, so working on the ground with our customers, delivering successful outcomes. Moved on to heading up our delivery function for a period of time. And now my focus has been very much supporting and running our cloud and platform center of excellence. That's primarily around using public, private and hybrid cloud solutions overlaid with our DevOps and platform engineering capability, but primarily helping our customers support their modernization journeys and being as efficient as possible in the cloud. And that's where the element of cost optimization comes in for me.
Great. If I can move on to you, Esther.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. And first of all, thanks to the Daemon team for having me here today. It's such a pleasure sharing this webinar with you guys. I'm Esther. I'm a solutions architect at Amazon Web Services. I've been in the company for almost 4 years already. I started as a customer or account say. That means that I was one-on-one with a big customer starting for startups, SMBs, and enterprise. And right now I moved to the partner organization where I help partners develop a lot of interesting and amazing projects in the cloud. And yeah, I'm so happy to be here today.
It's great. We're really happy to have you with us, Esther, today. If I can move on to you, Steve.
Thanks, Martin. I am Steve Anderson, Chief Client Officer for Daemon. I've been with the business for about 15 months now, predominantly working to deliver value to our clients, help grow the business. And my background, I did telecommunications for 11 years, working on first-to-market technology projects, and then worked in sports betting and gaming for a couple of years in hypergrowth, doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And then moved over to consultancy. So I've been working for the last 8 or so years on hypergrowth consultancies, which led me straight to Daemon.
Okay, thank you, panel. And I'd like to move on to our first topic, which I'm going to initially address to you, Paul. And what we're seeing is, as technology leaders, we're being asked to optimize cost, obviously, as ever, but also to free up money for innovation. So what are you seeing about what needs to change across the industry in order for that to actually work and move beyond just traditional across the board cost cutting?
Yeah, cool, brilliant. Thanks, Martin. I think, look, I mean, I'm going to back up a little bit and maybe talk a little bit around the problem first and some of the reasons why I think it fails. And I think, look, there is this constant balance for leaders, right? You know, we have it internally at Daemon. We see it and we observe it a lot with our customers, but leaders have this kind of problem, this catch-22 situation for them, right? Where they're being asked to save all this money for a rainy day, right? You know, make sure that don't spend too much and we've got enough money for the future, but also simultaneously being asked to build these amazing new innovative projects, right? So building a rocket ship that can going to go fly to Mars, right? You're trying to balance this on a day-to-day basis, and it's difficult. And I think what this then creates is a bit of a challenge around traditional cost cutting, which is a little bit of a blanket approach around how people do things, right? So traditional cost cutting is a little bit like a blunt instrument hitting your kind of precise machine, your organization, and it turns into something that's more about budget chopping rather than thinking about the value tuning that you need to do and think about when you're kind of doing this type of approach across the business. Now, I talked about a few reasons why I think this fails, and I think there's a few that come to mind for me, which I'm going to go through today. And I think the first one for me is visibility, not having the right visibility of where your costs are being burnt, right? And I think about this like you think about this big black box. If you can't if you can't see it, you can't optimize it, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of people have, right? Without the granular data, really, it's just guesswork when you come to talk about some of these blanket kind of approaches to cutting costs across your business. And I think the problem with this is, right, if it's guesswork, you can accidentally break something. And potentially what that means is you're going to stop one of these initiatives from ever being able to move forward through some of these kind of approaches, this blunt approach of blanket decisions around budgeting. And I think, you know, one of the things this leads into for me, right, we talk about these blanket decisions, these horizontal cuts that happen across organizations, right? You know, someone comes in and says, right, 20% across the board off of every project needs to come off, go off and find it. And I think for me, what this creates is something that I call the starvation cycle, right? You know, this idea of starving all your future bets from being able to be paid off because you're cutting money too short. And if I take two situations, right, you've got your legacy products that are being budgeted for and like maybe some of your more future thinking and innovative kind of initiatives that you're trying to deliver at the moment. Within that legacy team, that legacy cost that you've got, essentially that is going to be a system that has been built. It's going to be feature rich. It's got a team wrapped around it. It basically means that, you know, it's quite well established, right? And if you shave 20% off of their budget, what does it actually mean to them? It means that potentially some of the features they were looking to deliver that year might just take a little bit longer to deliver, right? So rather than get them in month 3, you're going to get them in month 6, for example. So that legacy product, yeah, cutting costs, it's hard, but the reality is it's not going to impact them at all. But if you take the complete polar opposite end of that, these cool new innovative projects, right, the next big thing in AI that you're trying to deliver, you cut 20% off of that project, you could well kill that initiative from being able to move forward at all, or even being able to deliver in the timescale that's going to add value to your business. So I think it's something you've really got to think about, right? That starvation cycle, it will get you leaner in the short term, right? You get an immediate cost saving. But in the long term, all that's going to do is starve you of that next big win that you're potentially going to have as a business. And look, I think the third element for me is I want to focus on the people side of things, right? Because we're talking about the projects and what the impact is to them and how that happens. But there is a psychological aspect of this that really I call the talent drain, right? If businesses are only going to focus on cost, right, what that's going to do is drive away those people within your business that are the innovators, right? The people that you actually want to be there to push you forward as much as you can and help you grow your business. And what the reality is if those innovators leave, you get stuck with, and I say that's the wrong term really, you have the maintainers, right? But those maintainers, they're going to be the ones that play it safe, that are just going to, you know, do what they need to do. You need those innovators to really, really grow your organization. And if you lose them, that's a massive impact. So I think there's a number of little things for me there, right? You've got the visibility side of things. You've got the way that you actually cut budgets across projects and you need to weigh up the value of all of them. But there is that people impact that it has in the long term if you don't do this in the right way. And I think if we're going to talk about what needs to change, right? So I've talked about the visibility elements. I've talked about that black box scenario. what you need is that big flashlight that you're going to shine down on your business, right? The way that you're going to be able to highlight where all that dead money is sitting, right? Trapped in your old processes, technology waste. Because once you've shone that flashlight, right, and you've got that visibility around what's actually going on, it's impossible to ignore, and people can't deny what's happening if you've got it in plain sight in front of people, and it means that you're going to take action. So I think that's really, really important to get the visibility right. The other thing for me as well is that mindset change around how you're going to think about budgeting for the future. So I've got this idea of this future fund rule that you want to set up across your teams, across your organization, to help stop money vanishing into a bottom line, right? You do all this good work to expose all the data, you save that money. The problem is, if you don't have an ability to ring fence that money, right, and put that into some kind of pot that you've saved to be used for something else, that's all just going to disappear into your bottom line. And that's something you don't want to happen, because what we're trying to say here is think differently about how you do things. It's not all about going to the boardroom to get some money. It's about going, let's hive this stuff off and think of a different way that we can spend it that's actually going to deliver some value for you in the long term. I think that moves me on to my last point, which again is very much about the psychology side of things, is the value mindset, a very different approach to how you think about this stuff, right? People need to stop asking that question, what does it cost, right? Because the immediate focus that happens there is you're talking about a number, right? People are just looking at that bottom line number, not thinking about, why am I spending that money? And I think that's what needs to change. People need to have a slightly different mindset, right? What is this actually doing for us? What value is it bringing? So that you can actually really understand why you're spending that money. Is it the right decision to do that, right? Because optimization isn't just about lowering your bill, right? It's about getting more value out of every pound that you're going to spend. And I think that's a bit of a flip, a bit of a flip in the head that you need to think about when you do this. And I guess in summary, I've said a lot of stuff there, so sorry, a lot of words, but in summary and all of this sort of stuff, right? If you want to, the whole theme of this webinar is around how can you think differently about your money? How can you really be the capital catalyst in your leadership to drive the right behaviors and right decisions? But the leader that realizes that innovation budgets aren't just sitting in a boardroom request, right? You don't have to just go every quarter or every half year to get your money. All of these things are hidden in plain sight, right? They're trapped inside your operational and technology waste that you need to go after. You need to find that dead money. We need to move that to the front lines, because then you can turn your efficiency into your greatest competitive advantage. Whether that's going to be some new product that you're going to build, some new features that you're going to deliver, the next big project that's going to deliver that great thing, right? And especially in this age of AI, where, it's all about making sure that you've got the money set aside to be able to do things.
Yeah. I love Paul's concept of future fund, but I'd address the elephant in the room, which is why it doesn't happen naturally. Well, I've seen that it's usually because you've got like a use or lose it culture, and in most companies, if a manager saves £10,000, they're potentially rewarded by having the budget cut by £10,000. So logically, they might look to burn that cash on things they don't need just to protect their territory. And Paul, to make that capital catalyst thing work, one option that I've seen work well is that innovation dividend. If a team finds dead money or automates a process, you could let them keep 50% of the savings for their own hackathons, and give them a question: where would you reinvest it? Is it going to be in training or improvement tools? But I think you have to incentivize the behavior you want. And if you want the team to stop thinking like budget hoarders and start thinking like innovators, you've got to stop punishing them for efficiency.
Thanks for that, Paul and Steve. If I can bring in Esther on that, I'm sure you've got lots of perspectives on this from across the wide range of clients you work with.
Sure. I mean, plus one, what Paul and Steve said, 100% agreed. But when I'm talking about this topic, I always try, or I like to highlight like something that happened to me. Like, for example, we all been like in that meeting where finance is looking at the bill and sees a number that it's trending upwards, and the issue mandate, like we need a 15% across the board cut. And that on paper, like it sounds simple, but as a solutions architect, I see what happened next. And the problem is that it's like trying to lose weight by cutting off like a limb. Like you'll hit the target weight, that's for sure, but the system is going to struggle to function. So basically, like the traditional cost cutting fails because it tricks technology spending as a static line. And in reality, like modern infrastructure in the cloud is a dynamic system. So when we really ask teams to cut costs without understanding the elasticity of the architecture, we aren't saving money. We are just accumulating the technical depth. And here I'd like to highlight like the three main points that I've encountered in my experience as an SA. The first one is like we struggle in what I call the lift and shift handover. Many organizations like moved to the cloud, but they brought the on-premises mindset with them. So they are still provisioning for peak capacity 24/7, just like they did with physical hardware in the basement 5 years ago, and they are paying for the just in case instead for the just in time. So the hard truth is that you cannot cut your way out of the design flow. So if you are architecting and your architecture is rigid, your cost will be rigid. So until we fix that design, we're just subsidizing the inefficiency of the architecture. Secondly, we need to change the questions we are asking. So traditional cost cutting is backwards looking. So finance or people will ask, what did we spend last year and how do we do less of that? Proper optimization is forward looking. So the proper question will be like, what does this worker actually need to perform at its best? And one approach is defensive, so it seeks to protect the past, and the other is kind of offensive, so we seek to fund the future. So when we are optimizing the performance and the efficiency rather than just cheaper, we stop seeing cloud spend as a drain and we start seeing it as a driver of value and innovation, which is actually what the cloud is meant to be. And finally, we also have visibility as a problem. So in most companies, people, it's making the daily spending decisions. So engineers are completely disconnecting from the financial impact of those decisions. So you need to imagine driving a car where you can't see the speedometer of the fuel gauge, but you get a letter in the mail 30 days later telling you that you went too fast and run out of gas, right? So that's how we are asking our teams to operate. So without real visibility and accountability, we're asking them to optimize blind, which is a problem. In my point of view, so what needs to be changed? So we really need to stop treating cost management as a quarterly exercise and start embracing FinOps as a culture discipline. That means that we need to democratize our cost data. We need to empower our engineers to make trade-off decisions in real time. But most importantly, it means changing our metric of success. So stop looking at the total spend and start measuring the value delivered per pound spent. So when teams own their costs as much as they own their code, optimization becomes a continuous habit rather than just reactive crisis. And let's just stop cutting and start really building on efficiency and innovation.
That's great. So I'd like to move on to our second topic, which is looking, where can we best find those savings? And we always talk about idle resources, about right sourcing, as Esther was mentioning there. People just doing a lift or shift on the capacity of their infrastructure, but I know that we've all found that sometimes the biggest savings are not coming from those obvious areas. And unfortunately, I'm going to pass over to Esther again as our SME here to got to talk again immediately without much of a break. But if I can go to you first on that, Esther, please.
Sure, no problem. So when we talk about the cloud waste, everybody immediately points to the obvious culprits. For example, the idly EC2 instances or the oversized databases. Those are easy to spot, that's true, but in my experience as a solutions architect, those are not just the tip of the iceberg. So the real drain on your bucket, the stuff that keeps you, or that keeps the bill, from being super high, it's often hidden in places where people simply forget to look. So I would like today to really talk about the invisible five, as I call them, which are the hidden costs that are quietly eating the margins of the companies. First, I'd like to talk about the zombies, as I call them. Those are the resources that were, spun off, for example, for a proof of concept 3 years ago, or a project for a developer who isn't even with the company anymore, and nobody knows what they do, so nobody dares to turn them off. So I've seen environments where 30 to 40% of resources have no clear owner. And that means that without strict tagging and governance of the resources, those zombies don't just sit there, they just multiply. So we aren't paying for innovation, we are just paying for digital graveyard, which is, sometimes a really big problem. Second, it's the just-in-case stacks, as I highlighted before. So let's be honest. I mean, as an engineers, like, we are incentivized to go over provision. So nobody ever got fired because the system has too much headroom. But people do get fired when, you know, system maybe goes down on a Friday afternoon, and, you know, we start with a crisis and what's about. So this fear-based provisioning, like, we pay massive premium to avoid performance conversations that modern auto-scaling could solve for us. It's expensive security blanket that we need really to outgrow and to really check it. Third, we have the silent killer, which is the data creep. We as organizations, we accumulate petabytes of data, we replicate it across the regions just in case, and then we act surprised when the egress charges hit. And one thing that I often ask my customers is, when was the last time you actually audited what it's in the S3 bucket? And the answer is almost never. So we are hardening data that will never be accessed. We're paying rent on storage that has zero business value. Number 4 is the easiest win. So yet I see it everywhere. And here I call it the dev and test environments running 24/7. So your production environment needs to be always on, that's for sure. And your developers, however, usually sleep. So if the non-production environments are running over the weekend and through the night, we're effectively wasting 65% on average on those hours. And that is pure, waste sitting on the bill every single month. And finally, there is the issue of architectural depth, as I call it. So sometimes the waste isn't how much you're using, but what are you using? I see simple workloads running on massive over-engineered service just because that's how we always have done it. And it's like using a semi-truck to deliver a single pizza. Like, it gets the job done, that's true, but the overhead it's really killing you. So the bottom line here, it's the biggest waste in your cloud environment is invisible on a single dashboard. So it's embedded in decision like made months of years ago that nobody has bothered to revisit. We really need to, clean up projects. We need a culture of right sizing by default and regular architectural reviews. And we need to stop treating our infrastructure as set and forget and start treating it as a product that requires constant refinement.
Great, thank you. I wonder if I can bring in Steve on that one as well.
I've got that vision of zombies in my head. I love the zombie genre, so it's a great one. I'll double down on that one because I think it's the easiest win, and it's something that I'm sure everybody gets. Is people have got into this habit of treating the cloud resources like diamonds. They live forever, and they're not. They're supposed to be like perishables where they've got expiry dates. And great practices have been putting on things like time to live tags on non-production environments. So the idea is you spin up a new dev environment, it should automatically shut down by 7 p.m. or it should self-destruct in 48 hours unless you actively renew it. Sounds really strict and harsh, but what you're trying to do is you're changing the mindset of running until someone remembers to stop it. That's where you're seeing these huge bills rack up and it's someone else's problem, to stopping unless someone else actually needs it. And then that simple flip in logic can save you 30 to 40%, as Esther said, overnight. But we've got tons and tons of experiences of colleagues and friends that we've worked with that have all gone through this, where the bills just rack up because they think they're tiny, but these are tiny that grow and grow and grow, and on scale create a lot of cost problems for businesses. And so doing that is a great practice, is putting the controls in place. And you'll see people come running if they see the servers aren't there in non-production. But what a protection. And it's definitely a good practice to get into. So if people are not doing that or haven't done that enough, that is one of the first go-tos that will get the ball rolling in terms of freeing up cash.
Right. And before I just pass on to Paul, if I sort of back that up from the perspective of having running engineering teams, something people need to look at, or I would really recommend you look at, is ephemeral environments and spinning up test environments on demand only. So modern tech, you can build this into your CI/CD pipelines. You can spin up a production-like environment for 20 minutes, which is enough to run a typical set of tests, rather than having something which is maybe scaled at a fraction of production, available 24/7 and only being used for a tiny fraction of that. Paul, if I can move over to you for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no problems. And I think, look, I think you guys have laid it out perfectly, right? And I think for me, what we're talking about here is basic hygiene, putting the right foundations in place when you're starting to think about this stuff, right? And having a bit of a strategy around what you want to do. And I think if I recall back, I think it was about 3 years ago, there was a bit of a comedy sketch put on by Dr. Werner Vogels around the frugal architect, right? And the whole concept of the frugal architect framework is around some laws or some ways that you work against when you're designing solutions and systems. And it's really treating cost as a fundamental non-functional requirement around when you're designing these solutions, right? You do the same thing with security, you do the same for performance when you're doing this. Cost is just as important around this, and you need to build that in, right? If you're not thinking about architecting this in from day one, you aren't really going to be cloud native, you're just going to be very expensive. And I think that's just the danger that we have around taking some of these bad habits into the cloud when we start to think of these things, right? And the reality is a lot of companies do this, right? They've rushed a lift and shift into the cloud because it's something they need to do and move quickly on. But they've then just, I think, Esther, you've made this point, Steve, Martin, you've definitely said this. They're just using the same bad habits that they used to have on the old mindset of an on-premise environment in the cloud, which is then leading to wonder, why do I have such a high bill? I thought it was going to be cheaper in the cloud, which is completely the wrong approach, right? To be cheaper in the cloud, you need to be cloud native. You need to be thinking with a different mindset. And that's really, really important. And I think, look, I just want to touch on maybe some of the customer experiences. I mean, I'll call them horror stories, but probably not quite horror stories, but there are some finds that we've had over the years, and these are really, really common when we've been working with our customers. And, typically when we lead into an engagement with a customer, the first thing that we want to do is we want to run something called a well-architected review, right? It's got, some pillars around different areas. One of them is the cost optimization pillar, which is a big focus for us because we want people to be as efficient as possible. And I think some of the things that have come out in at least the last couple of years, probably the last few years, a few common things that we see, right? And the first one that I see is the governance gap, right? When you build into the cloud and you start thinking about things, you do need to have a plan around cost management strategies, right? You need to think about this stuff up front. I'm not saying day one you need to implement every recommendation, but you definitely need to have a plan around how you're going to approach this stuff, right? And when I talk about the governance and the cost management strategies, what I'm talking about is things like, have you considered savings plans that might be able to make your cost cheaper when you're designing these solutions? Have you thought about things like reserved instances? So if you're going to have long-lived infrastructure that's going to be in place for a period of time, you can get the benefit of having them reserved and getting fairly significant discounts applied to them. And in other cases, like, spot instances, for example, if that works for you as an organization, there are risks in using that approach. But if that works for you in your organization, why not use it, right? And there's other things, like simple things like, making sure that software is in support, for example, because, say you're using a database that's out of support, suddenly you're going to find there's a bunch of increased costs that happen as part of delivering that service. So for me, the governance gap is a fairly big one that you really need to address early on in the process. And if I refer back to, I love this term zombies as well. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I think the thing for me, right, we were doing a review for a customer. This was about 18 months ago. They were, concerned about how much they were spending on the cloud. And essentially, what happened, we did a review, and the first thing we did was a scan across their environments to understand what was going on. We put some cloud intelligence dashboards in place so we could get a lot more of a granular view around, what was actually being spent in their systems. And we found 3 very large multi-AZ RDS instances, like the high memory type, that are very expensive to run, left running in production for over a year. When we asked, what are these actually doing, because they're not connected to anything, they said, oh, this was a test that we carried out. And that oversight cost them $700,000 near on, right? Well north of £500,000, right? That's a significant chunk of change. And we shouldn't really, we can't play that down. And another situation we had, right? We were, same thing, cloud intelligence dashboards. We were doing some reviews across the environments, and we noticed that for 6 months, this environment was spending $100 a month on Lambda functions that they were delivering. And then all of a sudden, the next month shot up to $25,000 in 1 month. And this was kind of a consistent charge that we were seeing over the month. And when we looked into it, we found there was a Lambda function that had been deployed, right? And the whole point of Lambda is a serverless function that you pay, per invocation. So it's a fairly cheap approach around how you do this stuff. But because it had been misconfigured and wasn't working properly, it was in this constant error loop and re-invoking itself. And over that course of a year, ended up costing them over $300,000. Again, significant chunks of money here that we're talking about. And the last one I'm going to touch on, and this is not necessarily about what they'd had deployed, but quite frequently we see there are misconfigurations made across systems, right? And I call it the config confusion. And in this particular situation, there was a data ingest kind of cost that looked really, really high. And when we drove into that cost, we'd actually found that somebody had turned on some really high frequency tracing and a couple of other settings as well that ended up pumping loads of information into the logs. I mean, referring back to your point about the S3 stuff, Esther, right? People rarely go and have a look what's actually in there. They were pumping out all this tracing information, and it actually cost them a significant amount of money. I think they'd spent something like around $250,000 already. And when we projected it over the course of a year, that would have cost them well over $500,000. And I think, again, just massive, massive, massive sums of money being spent on things that are, let's face it, they're mistakes, right? Or they're things that haven't been done correctly, or a process that hasn't been followed. And I think, look, in conclusion to all of this, right? These are just, these aren't just technical errors. They are going to be stolen innovation funds, right? That's what we're here talking about today. Where do we get the money from? We're talking like circa $2 million, right? That had been spent on ghost infrastructure, error loops, config confusions, and misgovernance, right? That money is the thing that's going to fund the next rocket ship, right? And if you aren't thinking about that and you aren't conscious of this stuff, it's going to be a common problem that comes up again and again.
Okay, right. Thanks, panel, on that. I'm going to move on. We're slightly behind time, so I'm going to move straight on to question 3, which I'm going to go straight to Steve on. So basically, let's say we've gone through all of these loops, we've identified these meaningful savings, we've turned off our $1 million worth of database spend that we didn't need to, and we've identified where we're storing data we don't need. How do we make sure that that data actually goes, that money actually goes back into innovation, rather than just disappearing into the bottom line and not getting us the innovation that we're looking for? So to you, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. If you don't give it a new job, it's going to go back to its old job. And a bit like water, it's going to expand into all the space of all the large operational areas that you can see businesses that have all of these setups in. So to stop that happening, you can do one of two things, or both. One is ring fence the savings. So don't leave the cash in a general pot. Move it to a dedicated growth budget where it can't be touched by daily fires. So a really important part is that tag it, do something that puts it somewhere that isn't going to get caught back into the BAU world of operations. And the two is, and finance will love this, is adopting sort of a venture capital VC mindset. So treating this reclaimed money like an investment fund. So a cool thing about this, and something that more forward-facing businesses are doing with the teams, is to get them more interested in doing pitches for future value. So how will this money that we have saved, that we've put aside in a growth pot, how will this create a new revenue stream or support a better experience for our customers or our products and services, rather than just how will this keep the lights on? And an exciting bit of anybody who works in technology and development is long gone are the days where they worked in the back room and the business worked in the front room facing the customers. It's becoming a joint collaborative process where people that work on technologies and development can actually see the benefits of what they're actually delivering. And that's fueling their excitement about how they can keep doing more. And it's a feel-good factor as well for the individuals. So you've got happy teams, you've got happy businesses, and you've got happy customers. So what we're seeing in 2026, in particular in the tech landscape, is that ability, that experimentation phase that we went through, especially with AI hype coming in, is now gone to the great squeeze. Because the reality is that money has to create value, and value has to create profits and growth and all the things that come with that. So the free money era has gone, and that AI hype era is settling back into a reality check. So the hype era of AI has officially collided with reality, and whilst it's easy to celebrate a successful hackathon, it's much harder to justify the sheer cost of just keeping that intelligence running at scale. And so you think of things like, I've had a fun hackathon, we've designed something. The cost of tokens has to be really carefully considered, because you've got to think about, whilst we've done something small, if you scale it, it's going to cost a fortune. And so again, one of the important bits to do with AI in a cost center is what can we do to take saved money and offset that expense of what AI token cost is going to be, the AI tax, as it were. So well-architected review, great secret weapon. You hunt down your budget drags, you find your 20 grand a month that you're paying for capacity you'll never use, and you migrate that exact same capital over to what is an AI tax. And therefore, because you're doing that, the finance teams or budget teams that you're justifying this to aren't going to see an add-on. They're just going to see a benefit that you've taken money that isn't working for the business and now making it work for the future growth of the business.
That's great. I'm sure there's some concrete things people can take forward there. And if I can move over to Esther on this, I'm sure you're seeing this a lot of this across, again, the wide range of customers you're dealing with.
Sure, and I just want to double down on what Steve just said about the Rhine fence and the busy mindset. I believe it's a brilliant framework, but also I believe for it to work, we need more than just a philosophy. We really need a mechanism, right? And mechanisms are loved in the AWS ecosystem. So we need to make the transition really from saving money to funding the future, to feel real for the person in the building. And here is how, we move from a defensive posture into an offensive one. And I'd like to share a couple of points that I normally integrate with my customers to really build that mindset. So first, we have to stop, moving money quietly in the background. We need to create a direct name link between optimization and innovation. So imagine you are telling a team, because you are re-architected the data pipeline and save 500,000 pounds, we are now officially greenlighting project X. So engineers see that their efficiency work isn't just disappearing into a corporate black hole, but instead it's enabling the project they actually want to work on. So optimization stops being a chore, it becomes aspirational for them. Secondly, we need to track what I call innovation velocity. So it's a simple metric. How quickly do reclaimed funds get deployed into growth initiatives? So if we save money in January, but that capital is still sitting there until June, our process is broken. So speed matters. If the lag time is too high, we lost the cultural buy-in and the momentum that really keeps the team engaged. So we need to move at the speed of the market, not the speed of the next budget cycle. Then we have the busy mindset, as Steve mentioned. So also means that we have to embrace a higher tolerance for fast and small failures. And we should reserve a portion of every pound saved specifically for rapid experimentation. So not every idea needs a 50-page business case. Sometimes we just need to give them a 2-week sprint or hackathons or hacker days, the permission to discover the value, right? Not just deliver the predetermined results. We are not just buying products at the end of the day, we are buying the capacity to learn. And this also, requires a fundamental shift in how we build. And I'm aware of that. So we cannot treat optimization as the cleanup phase after the launch. We have to embed the cost awareness into the design phase of every new initiative. So when a team knows they'll be measured on the value delivered per pound spent, they architect for efficiency from the day one. And that's how we ensure that our future savings aren't just one-offs, they compound. And finally, but not least, and this might sound soft to some, but I think it's super critical, like we have to celebrate the wins. When an optimization effort directly funds a new product launch, that story should be headline of the company's newsletter. Nothing reinforces behavior like recognition, and we need to make the architect who saved enough to fund the AI pilot, for example, the hero of the story. So the risk if we don't do this, as Steve mentioned, that operational expense is like water, right? It fills the space available, but I'd like to go a little bit further. So operational expense is urgent water. The day-to-day fires will always feel more pressing than the future bets, but without the structural protection, without executive sponsorships, and without these mechanisms, innovation will lose to keeping the lights on every single time. So let's just stop, maintaining the infrastructure and start using it to fund our next big thing and our next big project.
Yeah, and I think you've made some. I think they've made some really good points here, actually, and I love the way that you've kind of laid this out, right? So Steve, really thinking about the financial mechanics behind this, right, and effectively the plumbing that kind of flows this all through the system. And Esther, you've really brought this to life around the process mechanisms that sit around this and right how you actually deliver this stuff. But what I want to kind of touch on maybe outside of this is more the cultural elements. You guys have both touched on it slightly around, making those heroes, making those people want to do this. But I really do think it's a massive part in the shift that needs to happen, right? You want to incentivize people within your business, right? The soul of your business, right? To actually want to do this, to actually be encouraged to do this because they see the benefit in doing it, right? And I think once we've laid out that plan and we've given them that permission effectively to go and do this stuff because there's value at the end of it for them, what we're actually doing is we're providing them agency, right? They're now feeling like they've got responsibility and they can go off and do things that are going to make a difference. An empowered team is so strong, right? And it really, really does help. It really does help with this stuff to be able to make sure that actually, I think, Steve, you mentioned it before, right? It's not about getting a budget request approved. It's about engineers becoming like these mini entrepreneurs to a certain extent that are then going to go off and be able to find a way to fund their own future projects, right? And that's amazing. And I think the psychology behind this makes them feel like they've got the skin in the game, right? That's the thing that you want. You want them to feel like they're part of that journey, right? Part of the answer. Change that behavior, because that's the biggest thing that you have problems with, right? Everyone can make a technical change, everyone can make a shift to do something different, but behaviors are difficult to change. And I think giving them this permission and the ability to be empowered is massive, and it will only help in the longer term. And I think some of the recommendations that I've got around this, right, is gamify it for your teams, right? We're not just talking about engineers, your managers, whoever the cohort are, the group that are involved, gamify it, right? And you need to make it real. For me, making up these kind of, I don't know, not fake challenges, but challenges that don't actually end up with a benefit. Turn it into something real. Make it part of their day-to-day job. People want a competition, right? It's only natural to want to win at something. Why not win at finding money that then funds all the cool stuff that you want to do in the future? And I think then the big switch in their head, right, is it turns boring optimization work into high status activity, right? It transforms your engineers and your people away from cost centers, but thinking about value creators within your business. I think that's massive. Steve, you mentioned the big squeeze. It is absolutely real right now. Businesses are knuckling down hard around what they're doing because, we have to, right? All the stuff that's going on in the world today, it's causing a big squeeze in the money that we can spend. But if teams can find a way to earn their own innovation budgets, it's the best way to prevent burnout in your people, right? Keep that top talent engaged. But the biggest benefit is it's going to basically move the needle on those big kind of wins, those big bets, those projects that you really want to succeed in the future.
Okay, well, thanks panel. I'm afraid we are running short on time. I'm not going to be able to spend the time on the Q&A that we'd originally hoped to. So I'd like to summarize where we are today. So we've been looking initially at how the challenges on our technology leaders are changing, how the landscape is becoming more complex. We have gone across the panel and come up with some really, I hope, really useful examples of where you can look for where the real savings can be in your organization. And it might not just be these wrong-sized environments. It could be these zombies, and particularly picked up on Esther's point about looking for where you're using your storage, because I think that's something that will resonate across most of our clients. So having looked at where we can find those savings, again, I hope that as an audience, you've taken something in terms of how you can change your organization, how you can change the incentivization so that you can take some of those savings and move them and use them for innovation in the future. And I think enabling your teams is going to be a crucial aspect of that. So as somebody who's led engineering teams, getting them to think about this in the same way they think about the resilience of the system they've built and the operability of the system they've built, the cost optimization of the system should be up there as a first-class citizen in the same way as those. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I'd like to thank Paul and Steve from within Daemon for joining us. A particular thank you again to Esther from AWS and bringing all those really, really valuable insights to us. So I hope we'll see you again at future Daemon webinars. Please watch our LinkedIn, where we'll be publishing information soon on the future topics and the dates of those webinars. But just remains for me to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Martin.
Cheers.
Cheers.